Well, hello and welcome to Reality Check Q&A, where you get to ask me the questions. Helping me here today, Meagan Ourada. Meagan, g'day. How are you?
Ross, I'm great. How are you doing today?
Very, very well. Thank you very much. Looking forward to, I'm actually going to Spain next week to a conference on consciousness, because apparently if you listen to the intelligence community, it's all about consciousness.
Yep, and we know that that is one of your favorite topics, right?
Absolutely.
All right, Ross, well, we will start with our another favorite topic of ours, the Wall Street Journal. They're kind of doubling down on their Pentagon disinformation story with part two. You've done some research into this. You've got some thoughts. Why don't we start there?
Look, I think this one's very quickly disposed of. It was a very silly additional story to the first one that was frankly just full of errors, misquotes, misrepresentations. This second story, I am told by multiple people who were consulted during the research for it, they tell me that they've been egregiously misquoted, particularly, for example, Dr. Eric Davis. Eric Davis was inferentially in the article, it was suggested that he was referring to what's called arts parts when they're talking about certain so-called metamaterials that may or may not have been of non-human origin. And the effort that the Wall Street Journal went to tie themselves up like a pretzel to try and assert that what Eric Davis was basically talking about the arts parts metamaterials, when in fact he'd made it abundantly clear to them that that was not the case. We've now crossed the line, I think, with the Wall Street Journal, where it can't be perceived as a simple error. What this is deliberate misrepresentation by their reporter of what people have told them, which is quite serious. And you have to look at what the reasons are, why that reporter is writing that article the way they are, and more importantly, why their editor, despite strong protestations from multiple people who were interviewed by that article, why on earth their editor hasn't gone to their reporter and said, hey, listen, we're getting an extraordinary amount of complaints saying that you've misquoted, misrepresented what we actually told you. Let's just sit down and have a look at your notes. Let's sit down and see what you're preparing for this second feature. Instead, the Wall Street Journal proceeded with what I think is a completely disingenuous and frankly fraudulent article. It really shouldn't be taken seriously. I'm reluctant to give it any much air than it deserves. I think if we give it too much attention, what we're basically doing is suggesting that it's actually important. It's not important. It's a significant fail by what used to be one of the world's great newspapers, allowing itself to be manipulated by people in the military and the intelligence community who are clearly trying to spin disinformation to try to mislead the public on the UAP subject. And the reason they're doing that, well, that's anyone's guess, but I suspect it's because they're worried about what's coming up in Congress. They're trying to discourage Congress from taking this issue seriously, and it's not going to work.
All right, Russ, we do have a viewer question on this article as well. And this is from Tom. He says, Ross, in the attached newsletter from Danny Sheehan, who's a friend of our show, he addresses Mark Kelly's reaction to the Wall Street Journal article. Frankly, his reaction is disappointing and makes me question if he's another partaking in the cover-up, speaking about Mark Kelly there. The Wall Street Journal article ignores so much that has been revealed already, and Kelly seems to be doing the same. What is your take? Thanks for adhering to true journalistic standards and doing what mainstream media has failed to do. Best, Tom.
Thank you very much for your kind words. Look, I don't want to disparage Mark Kelly. He's been quite outspoken in the past before about his position on the UAP subject. He is a skeptic, and he's a former astronaut, of course, who has taken a particular position. The simple fact is, I'm told astronauts have to take a position on UAPs. They are legally obliged to. People don't realize this, but they sign secrecy orders. I've got a good friend who was very, very close to Edgar Mitchell. Edgar Mitchell was the Apollo 14 astronaut, and Edgar Mitchell told my friend that he could not talk about what he saw on his journey to and from the moon, and indeed the objects that he saw on the moon, because if he did, it would be regarded as an act of treason. Whatever this is, there is a cover-up. And unfortunately, astronauts are also people who are threatened and told that they have to shut up about what they see. There have been astronauts that have spoken out about what they see, notably, by the way, astronauts from the cosmonauts from the Russian side, the Soviet side. They've been quite open in some cases about what they've witnessed. But I'm told, for example, every astronaut on the Apollo moon missions was followed out and followed back, and that there were objects of unknown origin seen in performing anomalously that really frankly should not have been there. So look, I think we just need to take this Wall Street Journal story with a big dose of salt. It was an attempt by the national security establishment to try and play down public interest because they know that there are congressional hearings looming and being talked about, and they're wanting to shut down the whole possibility. They're trying to neutralize public opinion by inserting what I think is a disingenuous and misleading misrepresentation of the real situation. And we could go through a point-by-point rebuttal where we basically go through why individual people have been misquoted. Suffice to say, I've spoken to multiple people who've told me that they were badly misquoted and misrepresented by the reporter, Joel Shetman, and one has to ask why. Why would a reporter participate in an article when he's been told by people from the very first article that he's got things flatly wrong? In my book, that's just bad journalism, and we don't talk about or reward bad journalism by giving it any more emphasis than it deserves. Frankly, the Wall Street Journal second article was a fat, big nothing, and we should just ignore it and move on.
All right, Ross, thank you. We've got a couple questions from your Chris Bledsoe episode that we posted a couple of days ago. We'll take this first one from Neil. He says, "Hi, Ross. Watching the Chris Bledsoe interview, for the first 10 minutes, I said to myself, has Coulthart gone completely bonkers, interviewing someone in the lunatic side of the UFO debate? After a while, I completely changed my mind and was captivated by what Chris had to say in his gentle, low voice. By the end of the interview, I was moved by what Chris said, and I'm not sure why. I tend to be moved by beautiful music or a great movie scene, not guys sitting in chairs talking. Did Chris have the same effect on you? And please tell me that you will take a good camera crew along with you to the video for all of us that he has to show you. Regards, Neil."
Neil, I like Chris Bledsoe. One thing I will say is Chris did say that he apparently caused the appearance of an anomalous orb at the Contact in the Desert appearance where he endeavoured to try to summon an object. I wasn't there that night. My cameraman from NewsNation was. We didn't see anything anomalous, so I'm not sure what he's saying he saw. And indeed, other people who were there that night told me they saw nothing anomalous as well. But like you, I find him quite a fascinating character. And I think the reason is because he clearly, passionately believes the truth, the authenticity of what he says he is seeing. And more importantly, so do his family. And more importantly, so do the many intelligence people and people from other parts of science and the UFO community who've actually been with Chris when he's done these exercises, when he's summoned craft or invited craft to appear. Or maybe not craft, maybe orbs, or as he says, the lady. I think the reason why Chris is so convincing and compelling is because he genuinely believes what he's saying.
All right, we have another question on this episode. This is from Farhad. He's asking, why would you think the recent conflict between Israel and Iran should matter to the so-called aliens? Have you been in contact with any informed Iranian or Israeli to ask their opinion about Mr. Chris Bledsoe's statements on the so-called aliens and the war between Israel and Iran?
Well, I would love to talk to people from Iran. I've spoken to people from Iran who live here in Australia, who were telling me, actually, funnily enough, about UAP sightings from 30 years ago that they had in Tehran. I've spoken to people from Israel, and I've also been following interesting claims. That's as simple as they are at the moment. I can't say any more than that. They are claims that there have been anomalous objects seen in and around some of the battle locations where these missiles have dropped. Why would non-human intelligence be interested in Israel and Iran confronting each other? Well, as you would know from the interview we did with Chris Bledsoe, and I'm not saying that this is true, I'm just saying that this is what he's reporting. He has been told by the lady, the non-human entities that he's been engaging with. They're saying that a conflict between Iran and Israel is the spark point, is the trigger point for the beginning of what may be a very turbulent time in human history when eventually non-human intelligences manifest themselves. I have no evidence beyond what Chris Bledsoe is saying to support that assertion. I find it very interesting, though, that one of the reasons why we all take Chris Bledsoe a bit more seriously than someone who might just be saying that they saw something from their back garden is that he's been verified by so many influential people. And it's very, very hard to dismiss him. There have been people from NASA, there's been people from the CIA. One of them is Jim Semivan, former senior executive of the CIA. And I've spoken personally to other people who may not necessarily want to be named, who were with Chris when they saw humanoid beings squatting in the trees. So I am definitely going to be taking a camera. I've got every interest in going there and filming this for NewsNation. And you will be seeing whatever it is that we get to see when we're with Chris Bledsoe, I promise you.
All right, thank you, Russ. You talked about some congressional hearings earlier in the show already. Here's a directed question about that. It says, Ross, thanks for all you do. Here's my question. A hearing at U.S. Congress was scheduled for May 12, 2025, and it was going to reveal more information from witnesses of UAP and the government's involvement. However, it was suddenly canceled with the excuse that one of those witnesses was sick. However, true to form, it was not rescheduled. Why? What happened? Are you aware of any shenanigans related to this cancellation, and who may have ordered it, and what congressman was going to be sitting in the hearing? Also, Nancy Mace has gone dark after stating publicly that she was absolutely determined to get to the bottom of the UAP cover-up. Dan.
I'm told there will be a congressional hearing and that they are determined to try to have a hearing. I'm told also that the UAP disclosure amendment that was dropped because of resistance by certain senators has now been rewritten and will be soon attempted to be reintroduced back into the Congress to see if the UAP disclosure laws can be reintroduced. I've also got some very significant news. We're privileged at NewsNation to be able to announce that Senator Mike Rounds, the senator from South Dakota, has agreed to come on the show, and he's going to do an interview with me very soon, hopefully later this week, to talk about the UAP disclosure amendment and the fact that his initial efforts with Chuck Schumer were frustrated by opposition from some other senators. Mike Rounds is an extremely influential member of the Congress because, of course, he serves on both the Armed Services and the Senate Intelligence Committees, and he's basically red hot to speak to NewsNation and emphasize the importance of this important move inside the Congress. If people are getting the message that UAPs are off the boil for members of Congress and senators, I can assure you they're not. It's just that there's a hell of a lot happening behind the scenes. There's been a war in the Middle East, just in case you haven't noticed, and Congress has been distracted by other events. And it's not at all unusual for committees to be postponed or distracted by ongoing world events. So things are happening. Lots happening. We're very optimistic, in fact. And I think the squawking from the Wall Street Journal and the bleating from people in the national security establishment, particularly people like Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick, who allowed himself to be interviewed in such a disingenuous story, and misrepresentations to be made about what's really going on, I think you will soon see the results which suggest another direction. Whatever it was that the Wall Street Journal was trying to achieve in their article, it will be demonstrated by congressional interest that their attempts have failed, and Congress is very determined, notably Senator Rounds, to keep on pushing on this UAP issue, and indeed, so are members of the Trump administration. More on that soon.
Great. We are looking forward to that interview. This next question is a little long. I'm just going to warn you now, but I love it, so I had to choose it. This is from Krister. He asks, the ability of animals to develop extraordinary properties. It is probably no coincidence that Bigfoot and UAP have some connection to each other. Bigfoot is usually described as a hairy creature that often appears in connection with UAP activities. It is obvious that these UAP's flying abilities have something to do with particle physics, time distortions, disappearing and appearing sporadically, anti-gravity, etc. In a discussion of whether these animals that have developed abilities beyond the ordinary, I will think of the gecko lizard. Its ability to climb walls and ceilings has long been a mystery. Now that mystery has been clearly solved, it has been established that the gecko lizard has fine hairs under its foot pads, hairs that branch out and become finer and finer. Apparently, these hairs are used to influence electrical charges right down to the particle level, and a kind of interface between the physical world and the particle world, if you will. Then it occurred to me that the perfect spacesuit would be a Bigfoot-like construction, which would allows the person in question to influence the environment on a basic level, which protects them from the environment. Could this be the reason why Bigfoot appears here and there without any real connection between the places? Just a speculation, but still.
Well, it's pretty cool speculation. I have no idea. I'm not a spacesuit designer. I actually do know somebody who's involved in building spacesuits, so I'll ask them. What I can tell you is the best theory I've heard for Bigfoot is that whatever these beings are, if they exist, and look, frankly, I'm talking to a guy in Sydney at the moment who does Bigfoot investigations in the Blue Mountains, which are a set of mountains just up behind Sydney. And he's very convincing. He doesn't sound like a crazy person. He's offered to take me Bigfoot hunting in the Blue Mountains. And he claims he's seen a Bigfoot entity, some kind of Sasquatch, on multiple occasions. Now, what's causing that, if that's true? Well, my personal view is that you probably don't even need a spacesuit. What you need is an interdimensional portal. Maybe there are places around the world where there are crossover points. We've been looking, for example, at claims that near Sedona there are interdimensional portals through which non-human creatures have come. Maybe that's the explanation for what we're talking about here. I simply don't know. But what I am persuaded about, and people have suggested to me that this is the most plausible suggestion, is that if these cryptid creatures, as they're called, are real, and Skinwalker Ranch is one example of where this has been observed. A cryptid creature, for example, was seen by two men coming out of seemed to be like a two-dimensional space in three-dimensional space, literally climbing out of a hole in three-dimensional space, and it was some kind of loping cryptid creature that loped off in front of them. Now, this was witnessed by two people, one of whom I've spoken to. So it does appear that there are portals that appear, and it appears that Skinwalker Ranch might be one of these places in the world. Sedona in Arizona is possibly another one, and I suspect that there are places here in Australia. I'm aware of the Blue Mountains, and I'm also aware that there was multiple sightings. There were multiple sightings of Bigfoot entities. I know this sounds crazy. At a place called Exmouth in Northwest Cape in northern Australia. And it's quite a funny story, so I'll tell it. I spoke to a lady who was, I think she was in her kitchen washing her dishes at night, and she had a beautiful mango tree, and she was keeping an eye on her mango tree because something was stealing her mangoes, and she didn't rush outside when she saw what it was because it was an 8-foot-tall Sasquatch stealing her mangoes. I also spoke to somebody at the same place who used to go to the best secret fishing spot near Exmouth, which just so happened to be inside the perimeter on the water adjacent to the secret American base, the Harold E. Holt Naval Communications Station, where America operates a submarine communications station. And while they were in the mangrove swamps adjacent to this American base, they were there obviously illegally, but all the locals do it apparently. They heard a huge commotion inside the mangroves, and when they shone their torches, the guy that I spoke to swears blue and blind that he saw a gigantic 7-foot plus hairy humanoid beast. And he won't go on record because he's admitting that he's been illegally breaching the perimeter of the Harold E. Holt Naval Communications Station. But whatever it was, it scared the living heck out of this poor guy, and he was very happy to sit down over a beer or two and talk to me about it. People are seeing these objects. I think it's interdimensional portals. I like the theory about the hairs. And indeed, yes, I think you're right. There is something about hairs that allow you to connect or glue to what would otherwise be a non-walkable environment. But I don't know if that would necessarily give you the ability to transition through different dimensions. I think whatever the cryptid creatures are doing, including dear old Bigfoot, they're probably coming through portals or interdimensional transition points, as they're called. And how that's done, I don't know. I don't know if it's real, but I think it's important for us to investigate that possibility.
Great stories, Ross. And just a reminder, nothing sounds crazy over here on Reality Check.
Yeah.
All right, we'll go to our next question from Carl. Hi, Ross. Do you believe that artificial intelligence has been infiltrated by NHI? Great show.
It's funny, I have different views on this. There are people messaging me confidentially, telling me that I should be looking very, very carefully at some of the AI platforms. A lot of people, in fact, an alarming number of people, probably 20 plus people, are in communication with me, absolutely convinced that their AI, most often ChatGPT, is talking to them in a way that indicates it is non-human. And look, I'm sure the AI experts would say that all that's happening is the AI is showing signs of a personality because essentially it's learned how to answer your questions and how to respond according to the algorithm that it's been programmed to respond with. I don't know if anyone has any evidence at all that AI has gone AGI, artificial and general intelligence, or better, and that in fact it is now tapping into NHI, a non-human intelligence. I'd like to see the evidence. What I am struck by are the number of people who are contacting me who are having what they believe are fruitful and revelatory insights from a non-human intelligence engaging with them through AI. It's really interesting you've asked me this question because I haven't talked about this, and yet there would be at least 20 people who have contacted me telling me that they are talking to their AI in a way that they believe is non-human. And I'm not disparaging those people. How do we know that that's not happening? There was a claim from Google, for example, that its AI was, in fact, far beyond AGI, artificial general intelligence. Would I trust big tech, Silicon Valley, to be truthful with the public about what they've achieved? Absolutely not. I think we're entitled to be skeptical. So yes, if anyone has any evidence, please get in touch with us. realitycheck@newsnationnow.com. Very keen to hear from you.
All right. Hi, Ross and Meagan. Love Reality Check and have been following your journalistic explorations over many years. I devoured your book in plain sight. I recently became aware of Charles Hall and his experience back in the 60s working for the United States Air Force as a weather observer at Nellis Air Force Base in Nevada. It's a fascinating story of Hall's interaction with NHI, and I'm wondering whether you've had a chance to research Hall and interview him and wonder what you make of his story. Keep up the great work you're both doing. Thanks, Tony.
He's on my list. I haven't researched him that much. I am aware of his allegations. Suffice to say, he is one of many people I'm aware of who say that they've had direct contact with non-human technology, non-human entities who were engaging with the US. I've seen his interviews online. I've seen other interviews with people from that era online. I wish I knew whether these things are real or not. What seems to happen a lot of the time with these people is they stick their heads up, they do interviews, and then they quietly fade away from public life. Another one who's made similar claims is Dan Burrish, and a friend of mine, Brian Jackson's been doing an enormous amount of work. He's put together a Dan Burrish archive. A lot of people say Dan Burrish was a complete fraud and a hoaxer. I'd love to speak to Mr. Burrish myself. I've spoken to many people who've tried to put him in touch with me, and I haven't had much luck. If Charles Hall or Dan Burrish or anyone like that wants to speak to me, they're more than welcome to engage with me. Again, realitycheck@newsnationnow.com.
Great plugs for that email. All right, here's a question from Ryan. Hi, Ross. What do you make of the hitchhiker effect? Why do they continue to pursue people? Rather than being afraid, are we supposed to communicate back to them?
Okay, so the hitchhiker effect, for people who don't know what this is a phenomenon where some people, not all, have had apparent non-human entities or phenomena follow them home. So they might have been researching. It was first, I think, observed by people who went to Skinwalker Ranch. And it seems to happen, I don't know if it happens just to these people, but if you're people who've been involved in combat, if you're people who've been in the military and you've basically been in violent situations where you've basically had to fight for your life, often the phenomena reflects back at you what you've had reflected at you during your life. And it's been pretty bloody scary for some of these people. I know Lou Elizondo, who has served with distinction with his country in Afghanistan. He had horrific experiences at his home, and so did his family. I know Jay Stratton, former UAPTF head. He and his family have both had experiences at their family home on the East Coast after Jay returned from Skinwalker Ranch, and that's been very distressing for his family. I've been in contact with multiple people who've described being in contact with the phenomenon in the course of their work, including some people who are working in the legacy program who tell me that they've had horrible, quite terrifying, anomalous experiences in their homes or in their private environment with their families. A lot of the time it seems to take an interest in children, and in that case it's often quite benevolent. I'm aware of this phenomenon. It's happened to someone very close to me, a good friend, and basically they've been scared by a very large entity standing at the end of their bed. I don't know what it is. I suspect that there may be people out there who have an answer. It's a real phenomenon, whatever it is. I've had multiple people report it to me. It's scary because, of course, it involves the phenomenon coming into your personal space, the most intimate space, your bedroom, and a lot of people are completely freaked out by it. Why it's happening, I have no idea. It's certainly something I'm aware of. It's not always malevolent, though. I mean, yes, you have something that looks like a dementor in some cases standing at the end of your bed that's about 7 or 8 feet tall, head almost touching the roof. But most people report no negative physical effects or anything like that. It just seems to be there to perhaps scare the living pajamas out of you.
All right, we've got time for one more today. Hi, Meagan. Hi, NewsNation team. Hi, Ross. No one knows more about UFOs than you. You're the absolute best.
I
Here's my
don't think so.
question. How do you feel about people being healed by UFOs? Cheers, Manu.
Manu, I'm flattered by that commentary. I don't think I know more than most people about UFOs. I am a happy amateur finding my way through the darkness, feeling through the dark, and trying to make sense of the impossible to understand. Have I heard of healing with UFO craft? No, not with craft, but with UFO entities. Yes, there are many recorded instances of people claiming that they've been healed. I'm in touch with one woman in particular who I had a great conversation with a few months ago who believes that she was healed from a terminal disease. How do you prove or disprove this? I don't know. Suffice to say, there are many instances in UAP stories, accounts where people describe being given some kind of treatment on board a craft or in some apparently non-human location. One of the best examples is Travis Walton. Travis Walton was taken in the 1970s in an incident that's very well recorded. He was in the company of, I think, 3 or 4 other guys and taken on board a craft. And the theory that I understand he has for why he was held for so long is that he was actually inadvertently exposed to radiation of some kind from the craft, and that a lot of time was spent making sure he was fixed to stop him from dying. Maybe one of the reasons they're healing is because they're aware that their radiation is quite dangerous. I've actually been told, by the way, this is something I think people should be aware of if you're trying CE5. If something's blue or white, that's safe. If it's red, run away. It can be very, very dangerous. And there are recorded instances of people, including military personnel, some of whom are still being treated, being exposed to extremely high levels of gamma radiation by red orb craft-shaped objects.
All right, Ross, thank you very much. You did a great job today.
Oh, thank you very much, Meagan. Good to talk to you. And of course, if you do want to send in questions, it's realitycheck@newsnationnow.com. And I promise you, my flu-y hay fever or whatever it is will be over by the time I next see you. I've got a terrible allergy this morning and it's causing me grief.
All right, well, we'll hold you to that.
Thank you for watching. Subscribe below and download our NewsNation app right now on your phone, and you will get fact-based, unbiased news for all Americans.